the usual experience is you go to a bunch of classes and you're taking French or whatever in high school, and you've done this so much. You've worked really, really hard, and you spent, hundreds of hours doing French, like 200 hours in this classroom. And you go to France, and there's this 5-year-old kid, or even like this 4-year-old kid, and their French is better than yours, and you're like, dude, you've only been speaking for 2 years, and I've been doing 4 years of French in college. Mm-hmm. Like, this isn't fair. How is it that you can learn so much faster than I can? And that kid has had so much more French than you have. Because those first 2 years where they were completely nonverbal, like that totally counted. They were learning the whole time. Mm-hmm. And you're spending a few hours a week in a classroom, and that kid is spending all of their time in French. Mm-hmm. This is with like the 100% native speaking. This is slightly different from your situation. Yeah. But the normal thing is you spend your 4 years in college, you come to France, you meet this 5-year-old. The 5-year-old has 15,000 hours of exposure. You've had 200 hours of exposure. Mm. And then you're upset that this kid speaks better than you when, of course, they speak better than you. Yeah. Like, it would be insane if they didn't speak better than you. And when you control for that and you take a kid who is verbal, you take a 5-year-old kid and you move them into Spain and you give them 500 hours of exposure, and then you do the same thing with an adult, the adult ends up speaking better than the kid every time.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Gabe, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to have you. So I was actually introduced to you by way of our mutual literary agent, Lisa Demona. Yep. And anybody she sends me, I'm always compelled to take a look at. And I was immediately very intrigued by your story. But before we get into all of that, I want to start by asking you, where in the world did you grow up? And what impact did where you grew up end up having on your life and your career?
Ooh, good question. So I grew up in Los Angeles. And how did it affect my life and career? Man, I don't know if the location affected it a lot. I mean, I think the sort of upbringing did, in some sense, of just kind of, there was my parents generally were very supportive of just go do whatever you want. Like, not like do anything you want, like doesn't matter, but do whatever you want and we will help you figure that stuff out. And if you want to learn things, that's sort of really, really encouraged. And so there was a lot of support of music and of art, and I had my grandparents helped me go to this insane private schools that offered stupid things like ceramics and glass work and orchestral stuff and really good choirs, and I was really privileged in terms of education. And so I had a lot of exposure to a lot of things and felt like a sense of, well, I guess I could try this, and I guess I could try this, and oh, that was fun. Let's try this too. And there wasn't really a lack of opportunity for that. And so I really got to delve deep into music when I didn't think it was something I eventually wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so I did. Played violin for 10 years and viola eventually, and that was never something that I had any interest in doing as a career, as a something even that would continue after high school. But it was like, oh, this is a thing I get to do and spend my time doing and find joy in and value in. And that led to singing. Eventually I started taking singing lessons, and there was availability for that and support for that. And so I started taking singing lessons, and it was like, oh, this is a fun sense of improvement. Mm-hmm. Not something I want to do with my life, obviously, of course not, turned out to be what I did, but, this is fun. This is a sense of, I get to learn something and improve at it and, play with this sense of, can I improve myself? Mm-hmm. Can I go somewhere, have someone show me how to do a new thing and improve myself? And, with that being available, I kept taking that option, because it's addictive. I mean, when you get that feeling of like, I'm getting better every day, like that's super addictive. And so that happened with singing, and that kept going on. And so when I was like 15, that started. And so that became addictive there. Similar stuff with sciences. And so I guess that less the location, although I guess the location allowed me to go to that school.
Sure.
But more just those opportunities, having those opportunities, and being able to repeatedly get this sense of playing around with improvement and enjoying it, and then trying again with the same sort of outlook.
Yeah, so a couple of really interesting things come from this for me. One is you seem to have had this innate curiosity as a byproduct of the environment that you were in, and also parents who encourage this innate curiosity to try all these different things and experiment with them. One, I think, just coming up on my 40th birthday, I'm thinking about a text that a girl that I'm going on a date with tonight sent me about. I told her, I was like, I'm trying a new coffee shop every day, and she said, oh, she's like, I did that before I turned 37 different new things before I turned 37.
Honey.
And, it got me thinking about the fact that, we get sort of stuck into these routines and ruts and in everyday life of just sort of repeating the same sequence over and over. Why do you think we lose our sort of drive to try these new things as we get older? Like, why is that not more prevalent with age?
Meaning, as you get older, why don't you, why does the amount of things you try decrease?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, because it seems like you tried a lot of different things as, part of your education, from what you're telling me.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you're right that is a trend. I don't know, inertia. I think that there's a sense of, I'm trying this stuff. I guess it's working, and I guess let's keep going and continue doing the things as is. It's hard to try new things, especially I think as an adult. Like you run out of time. Oddly enough, like you feel like there's less and less time available to do things. At least that's been my experience. And so really being able to say, okay, well, yes, this is my routine, and this is my job, and this is my family, and this is my dog. And I'm doing all these things, and I'm still going to set aside a block of time to go, start learning how to salsa dance or something like that. It's trying new things is inconvenient. And I suppose as a kid, that's really your only job, is to try new things.
Yeah.
And then as an adult, you also have a job. And so maybe that's it. Maybe it's just the existence of jobs that sort of shuts down on you being able to really explore.
Yeah. Having had sort of the childhood you did and the parents that you did, what would you say to parents who are listening that you'd want them to know about this?
Gosh, that's tricky. Parenting seems extremely hard. My impression is that no matter what, it will. You can't do it flawlessly. There will be areas where you're just like, damn it, oops. But I don't know. I think if a kid shows some interest in something, the idea of like I've heard of some people in opera, especially where and in music, where people show an interest in it, and they get kind of shut down by their families. In a sense of like, that's not a good career to go have. So why don't you not do that? And why don't you go get a finance degree or something? And then, maybe later you can come back to this music thing. And I get it. Like I 100% get it, because having seen the music industry from the inside, it's brutal, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And the idea of having someone that I really, really cared about say, hey, I want to go be an opera singer. That's a very difficult thing to hear and to respond to, especially if you're in a position of power over them, because if you actually knew what that was like, which most parents won't. Most parents just have a vague sense of like, yeah, music must be hard, or there's probably not a lot of money in music, but like trying to be a professional musician is brutal. It's just terribly brutal. We can jump into that a lot if you want, but
yeah, I do want to jump into it.
Okay, so the opera career is, I would say, very, very similar to the career of like trying to be a professional ballet dancer. But it has this really important difference. Like with ballet, like there's going to be one job for every 100 people.
Yeah.
100 extremely talented people. Like the 100 people who are spending every bit of their being on being the best ballet dancer they can be, and have the resources to pursue it, and are in a location where those resources are present. all of that. And they and they start at the right time. They're starting at like the age of 0, doing ballet. For those people, there is like one job for every 100 of them. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. Like clearly, like those are brutal statistics. Like that's the way it is. But by the age of like 20, 25, maybe, like if you haven't made it by the age of 20 or 25 as a ballet dancer, there is sort of a commonly held sense of, well, you didn't make it, so try something else.
Yeah.
Or, you can teach this, you can use these skills in other ways, but you're probably not going to be a professional ballet dancer at this point. Mm. The issue with opera is that no one really takes you seriously until you're 30. Mm. And so you don't get, like, when you're 20 and someone tells you, you know what, you need to change course, you're in a really nice position to change course. You're basically halfway through college, like maybe you just finished college, but you could go get a master's. Like you're in a solid position to just move and change and pivot. But when you've spent your most of your childhood and then much, like all the way up through 30, and everyone is basically telling you, no, we don't know if you've made it or not. We don't actually care what you sound like until you're 30. Like, that's really tricky. And then there's this sort of window between 30 and 40 where now you have the opportunity to maybe make it. And then once you hit 40, like 41, 42, then there's a sense of, well, maybe not. Mm-hmm. And pivoting when you're 40 and pivoting when you're 20 are just vastly different things. So that's opera. Like it's really, really rough. And I have so many friends who are in it now and are going through it, or have gone into it and then realized just how rough it is, and then pivoted out. Mm. And it's just not a friendly career. And so having someone that you really care about and that you have power over, like a kid, if you really knew what that opera career was, and then they said, hey, Mom, I want to be an opera singer. The idea of coming back and being like, well, whatever you want, let's get you some lessons, is a very hard thing to say. That's not a simple like choice of saying, well, support your kids in everything they do. Like, well, that has consequences. Yeah. You saying, I'm going to support you whatever you do. You want to be an opera singer? Let's do it. Like, yeah, that sounds really great. And then that might hurt them. And so it's like, that is not an easy thing. And I can't just say just straight up, like, parents, all parents, whatever your kids want, just do it. Like, I would say parents, whatever your kids want, like, be aware that that's going to be a really hard thing for you to say yes or no to. Mm-hmm. That said, if your kid's curious about a thing and they want to explore it, like, you're basically choosing between encouraging it and then realizing that can have consequences, or discouraging it and realizing that can have consequences. Mm-hmm. Where they might resent it, or they might decide they're going to do it anyway, and like it damages your relationship. Like, there's no winning there. So I don't know if I have direct advice for parents other than, wow, that's a hard job you're putting on yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because my dad talked me out of going to the USC School of Music when I was a senior in high school, and I played the tuba, and he said, he made a really convincing argument. He said, you want to spend your entire 4 years of college in a practice room with a piece of metal? I'm like, no, not really. Now that you put it that way, that doesn't sound particularly appealing. And not only that, I get to see the real harsh reality of it is probably even, 1 in 100, like with a tuba player, you literally have to wait for somebody to die for a job to open up, because there's only one in every major orchestra. So I always jokingly say, it's like, do these guys, like, instead of looking at job boards, read obituaries every morning?
And they might. Yeah. It's rough. Yeah.
Yeah. So, talk to me about sort of habits and practice and sort of commitment that you developed as a result of all of this. Growing up, like with these kinds of things being such a big part of your life. Like, how did it shape your sort of day-to-day behavior?
That's tricky. I mean, I'm currently in a big transition period with habits. I would say for the first, I don't know, between the ages of 15 and 30, 32, 33, I'm 34 now. I used anxiety in some sense as a habit engine. There was a sense of, figuring out what is it that I should be doing? What is the best use of my time so that I don't waste a moment? And so that gave me a real strong ability to maximize my time usage. And it didn't give me a great ability to figure out what I actually wanted to do with that time, in terms of like, if I'm just sitting around and being like, what do I want to do right now? I didn't really have an answer for that. I'm developing answers for that now. But for that first part, it was, well, what is most optimal for this time? And there are really good answers for that. You know, how do you optimally spend your time? Not what do you want to do, but how do you optimally spend it? And so if that is a driving force, if it's a thing you really, really feel driven to do, is I need to maximize this time, or else something terrible is going to happen. If I don't do that, then whatever. I'm going to run out of money. I'm going to run out of time. I'm going to run out of ability. Something bad's going to happen. If that's chasing you, then you can use that to run a lot. And I did. And so there was a sense, like, as soon as I started figuring out, I never really applied it to music. And it's one of the reasons why I'm no longer a singer in some sense. There are singers who are driven to practice. And like as you said, like, do you want to spend your whole college in a practice room? Like, there's people who the answer to that is like, totally. That sounds like heaven. And those are the people who will tend to succeed more often than the people who are not. Yeah. And I was not that person. I didn't want to sit in a practice room all college. I wanted to go explore things and create things. Still, the thing that I have a real mixed... I have mixed feelings when it comes to music right now, because the thing that really, really did it for me with music was creation, which I think is for a lot of musicians the thing. You get together with people who are great, and you make something great together that has never existed before. Like, that's one of the things that music has to offer, and it's like awesome, like it's amazing. But like sitting on a stage in front of a big audience and trying to get through this piece and trying to make sure you remember all the words and all the notes, and then can also remember, maybe if you have enough presence of mind that you can also express yourself, like, that's hard. But getting together with musicians and just chilling and making something cool together, like that's just fun. So let's see, we've sort of gone a long way from habits. The habit thing was, I would say the main place that I could really, really apply that was with language. Once I figured out a way to really put time in and get language out, then I put the time in. Initially, that was fueled exclusively by fear, because the start of my whole language learning, like, methodology and the book that came out of it, and then now this app stuff, all this stuff, came out of me getting stuck in a situation where I needed to learn French in 3 months, or I would embarrass myself and get in trouble. And so that pushed me through French, that fear of like, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't really, really nail this thing. And then once that became clear that I could do this, then there was a sense of, okay, well, now I know a way to put time in and get language out. So why don't I just spend every morning, instead of doing French, or spend every commute? Commutes are really great for building habits. I'm going to spend every commute learning Russian. And so I did that with Russian. And then it was like, then I moved to LA, back to LA. I was in Europe during the time, and I had an hour commute every day on the subway. And Los Angeles is not a great place for commutes, because you do have commutes, but you are driving. Yeah. And you can't do flashcards while you're driving unless you do some crazy stuff that I've done recently. And so, Los Angeles became more difficult. I was less able to say, I'm going to spend a half hour, an hour every day learning Hungarian. It was like, well, I am busy and I don't have a commute, but I have this business and I have this book and I have all these people asking me how to learn things. I guess I need to keep doing Hungarian the way I was doing it in Vienna. And I'm just going to sort of push myself to do it. And then I'm going to push myself to do Japanese. And the pushing is harder. And when you don't have a clear cue of this is my commute time, I need to spend my commute time as optimally as possible, then it gets harder and harder to hold those habits. And then as that sort of anxiety thing behind you of I need to optimize my time or else, as that starts fading away, then things get more challenging. Then there's a sense of well, no, now I actually need to choose to study Japanese. Mm-hmm. So that's a long-winded way to sort of try and answer that question.
Yeah. I do want to get into the entire concept of becoming fluent, but what I want to ask you about is, you said you decided to quit being an opera singer. A couple of different questions come from that. One is, what prompted the decision? You've talked about people that you've seen who don't make it, and I'm curious, how do they recover from this sort of sense of, wow, I've put all this time and energy and effort into this thing that I thought I was going to become. I think it's a question of how do you find a new identity when something like that has been part of your identity for so long? I mean, I've seen this with athletes who don't end up making a career out of the thing that they thought they were going to do. So I'm curious, what that looks like.
I don't know how it looks like for other people so well. Like it's hard to have really, really deep conversations about stuff like that, in the sense that that stuff tends to be kind of painful. And people who really want to open up about wow, I tried this thing and I didn't do what I wanted to do. That's a difficult conversation to have. And so I haven't had it with a lot of people in terms of their experiences. I can certainly talk about my own, which please. Was, I think I got very lucky. I was doing this singing thing. Excuse the Chicago, the sirens of Chicago. I was doing this singing thing, and then the book happened, and the book happened to me in some sense. I was prepared for it and I put in the work for it, but the book process was not something where I was attempting to be an author for years at all. And I met people right afterwards. Right, I published this book, and I was hanging out with a crowd that was mostly artists and writers. And I saw oh, this is the same. This is people who are spending, 10, 20 years of their lives writing proposals and trying to get agents and stuff. And this thing just fell in my lap. This isn't this is the same. The opera and writing, all these sort of fields where you just get to you get to express yourself.
Yeah.
And then people buy things as a result. These are not easy fields. And the writing thing for me was I wrote an article and it was popular. And then I rewrote the article and put it on a very big blog. And then it went crazy viral. And then I had a publisher within 2 hours of that going viral. And then I went and got an agent. And my pitch, I cold called a bunch of agents. And the pitch was, hey, I already have someone giving me money. Can you please take some?
Yeah.
And that gets you in the door with a lot of agents. And that was the book process. Was I wrote an article and it went viral. That's the shortcut. That's not the route towards getting a book, really. I mean, that is a route. But I was struggling with the singing thing and doing the singing thing all the time. And that was my job. And then I was also teaching English in places, but attempting to make ends meet. But for the most part, I was focusing on trying to be a singer. This book thing fell in my lap. I did it because I cared about the subject matter and I thought I had a good thing to say. I wrote this terrible book. I heard nothing back for 3 months from my editor and from Lisa. And I kept writing, and then my editor came back with this just bomb of an email saying if you write like this, I'm canceling your contract.
Wow.
And I was already, because of singing and stuff, I was already in $30,000 of debt, credit card debt.
Yeah.
This book was the way out of my terror, financial terror. And so I learned how to write, and I learned how to express myself. And I found that writing was an outlet for the stuff that was inside in honestly a more effective way than singing ever was for me. And so as I learned how to do this thing, I fell in love with writing, and I felt I've been searching for something in singing for a long time. I've been searching for this sort of expressive outlet where I can just stand in a place and open up and people can see stuff that's inside. And that's the thing I wanted out of singing. And I found glimpses of it from time to time. And then in the course of writing this book, I found that I could do the same thing and I could do it more reliably. And I could do it in a way that was much more natural to me. I'm not a natural performer. I don't enjoy the attention. I'm creative. I enjoy creation a lot, and I enjoy expression. I enjoy being able to say, "Hey, this is me. Look at it," but not "This is me. Look at it" in front of a bunch of people. It's more like, "This is me. Look at it, and then please look at it in a different room." I would probably be like, if I were to continue doing the singing thing, I probably would have been a much better fit for recording. Mm-hmm. But the writing thing fell in my lap. I found that I loved it. And then by the time I noticed that I wasn't a singer anymore, I didn't have to be a singer anymore. Mm-hmm. There wasn't this financial pressure of you must succeed at this or else. And then in addition to that, there was the sense of, the thing I really wanted out of singing, I found somewhere else. So maybe this isn't so bad. That said, that doesn't completely get rid of the sense of, wow, I just spent 15 years of my life working on this thing and I didn't succeed at it. Mm-hmm. Like that is still there, but the consolation prize of actually you found something you like more is pretty strong. Like that's nice. And the fact that there are clear connections between what I'm doing now and the singing. Like sure. I wouldn't have been able to do what I wouldn't like. This whole language learning thing comes out of the singing, and I needed one for the other. And so me being able to sort of track that and say, this is, I needed to do this 15-year thing in order to get where I'm doing, to do what I'm doing now. So I guess it was worthwhile. Like those are some of the stories I can tell myself to make that thing feel better. And it works for the most part. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because it makes me think of something that Robert Greene told me once. He said, no experience in your life should be thought of as wasted. And, somehow you can always tie even the most insignificant of jobs to some value in your life today, it seems like. At least for me, that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I think that has to be true on some front. Like you are always learning from your experiences, even if they suck or if they're great. Like, yeah. So they make you. So whatever you are right now, like it's got to come from somewhere.
Totally. Well, let's do this. Let's shift gears and let's get into this whole idea of language and fluency. There's a lot of things that come to my mind when I think about the idea of becoming fluent in a language. One, I want to talk about it from sort of a brain development standpoint of, why is it that I can learn my native language, in 6 weeks as a kid, and I can't even deconstruct the process of how it happened. To this day, I can't tell you how I did. We spent 6 weeks in India, and when we left, I was fluent, and I understand it and speak it fluently to this day. Not very well because I don't use it very much anymore, but I mean, it's second nature to me. So I'm curious, why is that? Like, what causes that? And then let's start getting into this idea of, okay, can you replicate this process as an adult, and how so? Like, how does it happen? And then is that process of learning something that you can apply to other areas of your life?
So just to get a little more data on your thing, what was your total exposure to, it was Hindi? Or which dialect?
Telugu, which is a South Indian language.
Telugu, okay. So what was did you have any exposure to?
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are cleaned every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable.
That as a kid?
My parents spoke Telugu obviously when I was a baby. But we lived in Australia, and so they mostly spoke to me in English. They spoke it to each other.
Okay, so you were hearing it from them to each other, but not them to you.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
And then you went to India, and then you got 6 weeks of all the time exposure, and then you came out of there and were feeling pretty solid.
My grandmother doesn't speak English, so yeah.
Perfect. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure that there's nothing
Yeah.
like, whoa, how did that possibly happen?
Sure.
The sort of data that exists is that generally there is this sense that kids are really, really great at learning languages. And you've come out of this experience, coming out of this thing and being like, how did I do that? Like, obviously I have this magical ability that I had as a kid. And I'm like, how do I reaccess that? Or is it just gone?
Yeah.
And that like makes sense from like what you're saying.
Sure.
And the problem is that it's really difficult to keep track of in your mind the fact that how many hours kids actually get at learning languages. The usual experience is you go to a bunch of classes and you're taking French or whatever in high school, and you've done this so much. You've worked really, really hard, and you spent hundreds of hours doing French, like 200 hours in this classroom. And you go to France, and there's this 5-year-old kid, or even like this 4-year-old kid, and their French is better than yours, and you're like, dude, you've only been speaking for 2 years, and I've been doing 4 years of French in college. Like, this isn't fair. How is it that you can learn so much faster than I can? And that kid has had so much more French than you have. Because those first 2 years where they were completely nonverbal, like that totally counted. They were learning the whole time. And you're spending a few hours a week in a classroom, and that kid is spending all of their time in French. This is with like the 100% native speaking. This is slightly different from your situation.
Yeah.
But the normal thing is you spend your 4 years in college, you come to France, you meet this 5-year-old. The 5-year-old has 15,000 hours of exposure. You've had 200 hours of exposure. And then you're upset that this kid speaks better than you when, of course, they speak better than you.
Yeah.
Like, it would be insane if they didn't speak better than you. And when you control for that and you take a kid who is verbal, you take a 5-year-old kid and you move them into Spain and you give them 500 hours of exposure, and then you do the same thing with an adult, the adult ends up speaking better than the kid every time.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. And so one of the and this is something you get to kind of see like the it's really interesting going, like I've done a bunch of these immersion programs. There's a school in Vermont called the Middlebury College, and they have a language school every summer. And the way the summer classes work is that you show up and you sign a contract, and once you sign that contract, you're not allowed to speak anything that's not your target language. And if you do, you're kicked out. No refund.
Wow.
Yeah, they're super intense and awesome. And so I went there for the first time for German. My previous language learning experiences were 7 years in Hebrew school, got nowhere. 5.5 years in high school and middle school learning Russian, got nowhere. Did fine in the classes. I passed the tests and things, but I couldn't speak those languages. And so I did this German program because I figured I can get 2 semesters of German credit in college, and I really don't like this language stuff. So great. I can knock out 2 semesters in 1 summer. Let's do it. And this crazy contract thing sounds cool. Let's try that too. And so I did German that summer, and I could speak German by the end. And I was dreaming in German by week 2. And I had 0 exposure to German beforehand. And my dreams, I wasn't dreaming in German like with interesting conversations. My dreams were like, this is blue. That's blue too. This is blue. Look at the desk. It is blue. Like just stupid dreams. But they were in German. Sure. And by the end of it, I could hold a conversation in German. And then I went back the following summer, and I reached sort of what I would call like fluency, C1 fluency. The Europeans have real specific, like, what do you mean when you say fluent? Which is nice because fluent is so vague. I did an immersion program in Italy for Italian. I went back to do French. I went back to Vermont to do their French program. I went back to do their Russian program. And I almost went there to do their Japanese program, but didn't have the time. I love these immersion programs. And one of the things that you get to watch is you watch everyone else. Like, I'm coming in here with this method. I've refined this method over multiple languages and many years and stuff. And there are people in there with no method. They don't know what they're doing. They're just coming in and learning. And their rate of learning is insane. It's awesome. Everyone is leaving these programs speaking these languages. Because when you're getting that much exposure, and it's that much real exposure, one of the issues is when you're learning languages in college and in high school, often what you're learning are translations. Like, that's not the language. You learning translations is you learning about a language in some sense. You're like, oh, this is the word for X. Like, that's not really learning what does that word mean? Like, when is it used? What is a story I could tell with that word? Like, all that is learning the language, but you learning a translation is not really learning the language itself. And so you put people in an environment where they're forced to get real language content, where the only way you can interact with words is in that target language. If someone is saying something is blue, they're talking about blue things, and they're holding it up, and they're like, "Das ist blau," and you learn the language that way. And so, like, you're getting real content, and you're getting real content for like 16 hours a day for every waking hour. And when you do that for 7 weeks, everyone at the end of this is speaking that language. Now, like, you've had this experience where as a kid, you basically had that experience. And in addition to that, this was, I think they're called heritage languages, basically. But you had this whole life experience of your parents speaking to each other, where you were also learning. And it was all this sort of latent stuff. Like, your parents weren't speaking it enough for you to actually pick it up. Like, usually you need around 30% or more of your time spent in the target language to pick it up as a kid, which is like a lot. Like, it needs to be most of, like, a third of your waking hours. Like, it's 5 hours of class a day, basically. Which, as an adult, if you had 5 hours of class a day and you were doing that for 5 years, you would be 100% fine in whatever language you wanted to learn.
Yeah.
And so you as a kid were getting less than your 30 hours. So you were not able to speak this language. And then you did an immersion program, basically. And at the end of it, you could speak this language. And that's not different from how you would behave as an adult. It's that as an adult, you don't have 5 hours a day to spend learning anything. Right. And you don't have 16 hours a day to learn anything. Yeah. I mean, you don't have the idea of full immersion in any subject is something that generally only kids get the luxury to do, except in really exceptional cases where an adult decides, all right, I'm going to set aside 2 months of my life and I'm going to do a language immersion. I'm not aware of other immersions that exist. I guess there's like, I'm going to go do a research project and devote my whole everything to that. Yeah. Like, that's, I guess, another form of immersion. But like, there is nothing, there is little that is special about being a kid in terms of learning languages, except for that luxury of time, which is huge, is everything in some sense. There is a window between 6 months and 12 months where kids can hear things better. You probably got the advantage of that. How is your accent?
It's funny. I think the funny you ask about accents, because even when I speak other foreign languages, like if I speak in Spanish, you know, somebody who's a fluent Spanish speaker might disagree with me, but I don't sound like the average gringo when I speak Spanish. Like, I don't have a super like gringo accent. I lived in Brazil for 6 months, and by the time I was done with 6 months of Brazil, like, I remember, the guy who gave me one of my very first surf lessons, his wife was like, "Wow, you guys speak better Portuguese than some Brazilians we've met."
That's, I mean, honestly, there's a lot of correlation that people have seen between language learning ability and musicians and musicianship in some sense. And my theory on that has to do with how much you care about what you're listening to. Yeah. Because if you're actually, as soon as you spend some time being like, oh, wait, I want to hear how you're saying that. As soon as that attention is there, accents are a thing you can master. I ask about the Telugu thing because if your parents were speaking it to each other, it's very likely that you were processing that in terms of the accent part. Yeah. And that's something that kids really do have an advantage on, but they lose that advantage as soon as they hit 12 months of age. Like, that's a real tiny window. And beyond that, they have this whole fearlessness thing where they're willing to expose themselves to more language than adults are. If there's a room full of French speakers and you've taken a semester of French, you're probably going to run out of that room. Whereas if there's a room full of French speakers and a kid has never spoken French, they're going to run into that room and be like, what's everyone saying? Yeah. And that is another advantage where they're getting more hours than an adult would get, because the adult will run away from those hours. But aside from that, that's it. That's all the advantages of being a kid. Adults learn way faster because they're smarter, because they've learned how to learn. Sure.
So let's talk about actually how we would apply this in the context of our lives today. I mean, you've obviously deconstructed into a process. So how do we actually do that? Like, how, can you give us a framework for how this can be applied if somebody listening to this, like, I want to learn a language?
Yeah, absolutely. The first barrier to entry with language is pronunciation. If you can't hear it, you can't remember it, at least not as well. Japanese speakers trying to remember words like rake and lake when they can't tell the difference between those two consonants are in a very, very disadvantaged position. And so they need to work on being able to hear the difference between those two things. There is research showing exactly how to do that. It's called playing with minimal pairs. You take words that are like rake and lake, where the only difference between the two words is the challenging spot, and you test them. And you basically play a word at random. You say, which one was it? Was it rake or was it lake? And then you get feedback saying whether you're right or wrong. Those types of tests build your ability to discern between sounds in a target language. And I've spent the last 4 years building tools like this because they're important and they didn't exist. Now they exist. And you can make them yourself. And there's guides to that on my website. So like your very first step is I need to be able to hear all the sounds in the target language or else I'm screwed. Mm-hmm. So that's your first barrier. And so you overcome that barrier. And you learn the pronunciation system of that language. That takes like 2 weeks. It's not a big thing. It's just necessary, but it's not a big thing. You do this 2 week thing, you now can hear, I can hear that this is caro and this is carro. I can hear the difference between car and car. You can hear this and thing. You can hear that r is different from r. As soon as you can hear all these sounds in Spanish, let's say, at that point, then you're in a position where you can remember Spanish words like a Spanish speaker can, because they can hear the sounds, and now you can hear the sounds. At that point, then what you're trying to do is get a bunch of input and get it into your head. And so that challenge becomes a challenge of memory. Like the rest of this game is all memory based, is all how do I get as much content as I can into my head. I used to recommend this sort of, like the thing in my book is this really nice like step thing that is very easy to wrap your head around. You learn the pronunciation. You get a list of 600 words that are really, really common, like dog, like table, laptop, president, things that people use a lot. But you get those words that really you could take a picture and you could learn that word. And so you do. And so you learn 600 words using pictures. And you get all the English out. You never use English in any of this. Maybe the very first time you see the word, you can look at the translation just to be like, oh, I see what that's supposed to mean. And then you use a picture from then on out. No. You use a flashcard system called the spaced repetition system. This is so far the most efficient way we've figured out how to learn things. Basically, you use flashcards because they're tests. You testing yourself is way more efficient. It's like five times more efficient in terms of time than you just reading. So if you see president is the same thing as this picture, that's fine. But if you actually just show a picture and you're like, what is this picture about? Like, what's the word for this thing? That's going to be 5 times better in terms of your time usage. So that's already what you're getting out of using flashcards at all. Spaced repetition basically monitors your how well you remember things and tries to test you right before you forget it. So it plays with the timing. Instead of just looking at all your flashcards every day, it will show you a flashcard saying, this is chat. And on the back, it has a French-looking cat. And then if you tell the program, yeah, I got that. I remembered that today. Then it will wait 4 days. And then in 4 days, it will say, hey, here's a French-looking cat. What's the word for this? And you're like, chat. And it says, okay, well, you handled 4 days. Let's try 7 next time. And so it keeps expanding that interval, trying to stretch you and trying to find, how long can you remember this before you actually forget it? And if you do forget it, then it'll contract that interval. It'll show it to you more often. And so you use these sorts of systems, but you use them with these kind of tests where instead of training translations, you train pictures to word connections. Yeah. You build up this 600-word vocabulary. You have a base, this sort of foundation. And then you use sentences. And you say, okay, well, if I have a sentence like the dog is chasing the cat, now, and I'm learning English, let's say, since that will help us generalize a bit. I know the word cat. I know the word dog. I know the word to chase. So what about the dog blank chasing the cat? Now I can have a blank for is. Usually is not a thing you could attach a picture to. Like is totally abstract concept. It's just it's a functional grammatical thing. But in that story, the dog is chasing the cat is totally looks like something, is looks like the thing that allows the story to happen. Like you have a picture of a dog chasing a cat, the dog blank chasing the cat. Like that works totally for a flashcard. Mm-hmm. You can use a fill in the blank to learn a word like is. And same idea with what's the difference between chase and chasing. Well, chasing is the word that allows you to tell this story. It's not just the general concept of to chase. This is the thing you need. Is chasing is the construction you need to tell about this thing that's happening right now. Mm-hmm. And so you have a blank there, and perhaps you give yourself this clue. You're like, okay, to chase, I need to modify this to chase word so I can tell this particular story. The concept of what is the? Well, the is another thing that allows you to tell this story. And so you start getting a bunch of sentences, and you can look at translations the first time. That's fine, just to get your bearings on what is the story we're trying to talk about here. And you keep blanking out words within that story. You figure out what that word is doing, what's the role of that word, and then you blank it out and you use that flashcard with the picture again, 100% in your target language, and you keep going that way. And then you basically go through a grammar book and you steal 2 sentences off of every page. That's going to cover pretty much most of your bases in that language. And once you've done that, you're going to be at a pretty solid intermediate level. You should be able to hold a decent conversation, and then you can start playing around. And the playing around process involves you taking sentences from a frequency dictionary where you see the top 1,000 words in a language with example sentences, and you take the ones you want. You can go back through your grammar book and grab the little bits that you missed. You can start watching television. Mm-hmm. You can start reading books and then grabbing sentences from those if you want, and you can start holding conversations, and that's sort of this play stage. That's sort of the framework in the book. The thing that I've kind of modified since then, since it's been 3 years, I guess, since then, and because Japanese is insanely hard and has forced me to innovate, is I basically jumped straight to the play stage with those 600 words, and so I get a tutor because tutors online nowadays are $5 an hour because it's insane. Because there are websites like italki.com that will put you in touch with tutors for $4, $5, $6 an hour. And I won't speak a word of the language. I'll get a tutor there who is able to speak English. I'll send them my list of 600 words or 625 words. And I'll say, all right, let's start. The first word on this list is star. I have a memory about looking at the stars outside my airplane window. Can you help me write that in Japanese? And they will help me write a personal sentence about a memory I've had about stars. Mm-hmm. And then I will use that to learn the word star, and I will also use that to learn the word window and airplane and is looking and concepts like now. And we'll discuss the sentence, and I'll try to get a sense of, okay, what's each word in the sentence doing? How does it work? And we'll get all that. I'll make flashcards for that when I'm done with the tutoring session. But while I'm there and I understand it, then it'll be like, okay, well, we just spent 15 minutes on this very first sentence in Japanese. The next word on this list is white. So let's talk about how this airplane I'm in is white. And let's talk about how to identify colors and things, and that I am in this airplane. Let's talk about the word for I. And so we'll spend like an hour making 4 sentences and really understanding them. Mm-hmm. And then I'll spend a week memorizing every bit of data in those sentences using these flashcards. And then the next week we'll make, instead of 4 sentences, we might get through 6 sentences in an hour. And I'll do it again. And then we'll go through 8 sentences in an hour. And usually by, I don't know, I guess in this case, 6 months in, I was having conversations in Japanese. And it's like, oh, this is way better. So let's just use this. So generally, I've been pushing people away from this stepped approach of saying pronunciation, then just picture words, then sentences from a grammar book, and then play around with tutors to, learn pronunciation first for sure. But you don't actually need to do the picture words. You could just run straight into tutoring stuff if you're comfortable with that. Okay. Otherwise, do the picture words for like 50 words until you get comfortable with the computer system, because the flashcard system is challenging from just a UI standpoint. Yeah. The program is a little challenging. And then go play with the tutor and learn all this stuff, because you'll learn a lot faster.
What is your impression of tools like Duolingo? Are they just kind of useless, or like does it just give you sort of a base level of being able to function like in Mexico and order food and drinks and not get robbed?
There are programs like, let me think. Programs like Pimsleur. We'll start with Pimsleur. Pimsleur will teach you phrases like that. Will help you memorize phrases that will make it so you don't get robbed, like you won't get robbed and you can order some drinks. Those are valuable for that purpose.
Yeah.
You aren't really learning the language. You're getting a little bit of pronunciation exposure. You're getting some sentences into your head, but you're not really comprehending how every bit of that sentence works, really. But you are able to recall the right sentence at times because they're using spaced repetition. They're using that same system. Because they're doing that, they are able to jam that in your head, and so by the end you will be able to order the thing you want to order. Awesome! Like that's a valuable function that it's accomplishing. It's a different goal than I want to speak this language. I want to be able to think in Spanish. Programs like Duolingo, like most of the things out in the market, they are training translations. Translation is spectacularly difficult. There are reasons why like simultaneous translators are paid $200, $300 an hour. Yeah. It's one of the hardest jobs on the planet. Translating is hard. Like thinking in a language is relatively easy. You taking a picture of you searching Google Images for chat and you seeing that French cats are different from American cats. And then you choosing something that surprised you. You're like, oh, these are super small. All the French cats are small. I don't know why. You choose some small cat. You put it on a flashcard. You say, this is chat. You memorizing that is really easy. That takes very little time. It's a thing you store readily. But you memorizing that cat is the translation for chat is hard, comparatively quite hard. And you trying to do that for words that don't translate as well as simple image things. Necessity, absolutely, things like this. Like what is it to be, to think, to how do I express I would like to do that, but I can't right now. These kinds of things are not expressed in the same way. They don't even mean the same things in other languages. And you trying to do this translation thing of you magically decoding English or decoding French into English is spectacularly difficult. It's something like I suck at. I can speak in many of these languages and I can't translate. People come up like I've had interviews where people are like, say this, and I'm like, I don't know. Can you have a conversation with me where that would come up naturally and then I could say it? And so these programs like Duolingo, they try to make translation fun, and they do a good job of that. They gamify this thing quite well. The interfaces are done very, very well. But what they're training, their product is translation. The reason why Duolingo is free is that you are the product in Duolingo. You are translating content for other businesses who are trying to translate their websites, and they want humans translating it.
Right.
And so they have to do translation. That's the whole financial model is based on translation. And as long as you are doing translation, you're not actually learning the language. You're learning about the language. You're learning this decoding task, which is valuable if you want to be a translator someday. But that's only if translators think and speak those languages. They don't just decode.
Right.
And really the first step, if you want to be a translator, is learn the language. Not the translation skills, learn the language, and then pick up translation skills on top of that because it's an additional skill. It's not the primary skill. And so that's where almost all of the other products on the market, and like Pimsleur too, but Pimsleur is very phrase-based, that's where most of the products are sort of stuck on the market. Rosetta is playing around with non-translation, which means they're doing some things right. But there are limits. There's a thing that's really tricky about language learning is that the thing that people want is a thing that people can't have. The thing that people want is they want to show up in a room or sit on their couch with their phone. But they want to show up in a room. They want a teacher to stand up in front of them, and they want that teacher to jam French into their heads. Or they want an app where they could press some buttons and sort of passively get French stuck in their heads. Or they want to listen to a recording overnight, this sort of like osmosis thing where I'm just going to listen to recordings and then in the morning I'll speak French. And none of those are active enough.
Sure.
None of those involve decisions and you really actively thinking, I want to get this into my head. How do I make that happen? And language is so personal. Like you're messing around with how you think. It's not something that can be done passively. And so Rosetta runs up into that. Like, even though they're doing the translation thing right, in the sense that they're knocking that out, it's not active enough. It's the sense of passive bloop, 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 and you want language in your head, and it's not going to happen in terms of you really getting the ability to think in any complicated way. Rosetta's, I found, has been useful for getting some vocabulary in, but can't get complex thoughts. It can't get you to think in a target language. It's one of the challenges I've been hitting in terms of like I've made these pronunciation trainers between 2013 and 2017. That was fixed content. It's like we're talking about like an hour of content that I can cover all of in a video, and I do. And basically, the first step of the pronunciation trainer is like, listen to this video, watch it, because I'm going to talk about everything that you're going to learn for the next 2 weeks, and then we can talk about pre-done content. But that's about the limit of pre-done content. If you've already done the content and you're just feeding it to people, then they need to learn it at some point, and so you need to basically cover it in some sort of engaging way, like a video. But a language is way more content than you could possibly cover in an hour. Or in really any number of videos. You can't cover the whole language in any number of videos. And so if you want to make an app that actually will teach a language and teach like the real language, not just translation skills, but the ability to think in a language, what you need to do is give people the ability to freely explore that language and make active choices of, I want this in my head, I want that in my head, and I want to encode it in this particular way. And so this last year has been trying to design for that. And that's been like, now that's my whole life is designing a new app that does that. And it's challenging. I mean, there's like the idea of how do you take the work away while keeping the decisions in the process? How do you keep things active while removing the stuff that's tedious? Like that, those divisions are not always obvious. And so that's sort of the general challenge when you want to make something that really teaches people things. How do you keep them active without boring them? Like, that's tricky.
Wow. Well, this has been really, really fascinating. So I have one last question for you, which is how we finish all of our interviews at the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
Unmistakable. Oh, give me more. Give me a little more background on it.
Sure. So for the purposes of the book that I wrote, I defined unmistakable as something that is so distinctive that nobody else could have done it but you. But I mean, the answers to this question have ranged all over the board.
God. I mean, I guess I have to deal with the fact, like, is anything actually unique? What makes something unmistakable? I think that one of the things that came out of writing my book and actually like going from having a terrible book to a good book, I read an example that my editor gave me of a book he edited where the first draft was similar to mine and the final draft was good. And it was called Thank You for Arguing by Jay Hendricks. And it was a book on argumentation. And the thing that comes across within the first paragraph, because I didn't come into that book thinking, wow, I really want to learn about argumentation. But I read that first page and I wanted to keep going. And I wanted to keep going because I felt like I met someone. I felt like I just got introduced to someone who is so nerdy and obsessed with this topic that is so niche and like, just like he loves it. And it's obvious how much he loves this topic of argumentation. And I think, oh, well, I don't care about this, but I do care about you. I want to know about you and what makes you tick, because this obviously makes you tick. And how could that possibly be? Because I don't care about this topic, and how do you care so much? And it made you want to keep reading. And that was sort of that was my editor's point. It was like, that's what a book is. If you've done this thing right, like you've made it a friend in some sense. And I think when you see something that catches your attention in that way, where it isn't just I naturally have an interest in this thing, but you're pulled to it because you're pulled by the personality that's behind it. I guess for me, that's something that's relatively unmistakable or unique. Is when you can see the person behind it, or you feel that there must be someone there and that you want to know more.
Wow. Awesome. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
I guess probably the best place to start would be either getting my book on Amazon. It's called Fluent Forever. Or on my website, fluent-forever.com. That will link not just to the book, but also to this app I'm developing. And that's sort of where things are moving now.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.